Hi guys, it's Yasin here. I thought today I wanted to just unpack a little bit about racial essentialism, um, jumping off of concepts like um, black excellence, black girls are magic. Um, when we look at when we look at those types of memes or ideas, one of the things that I sort of can't escape is that it feels almost like these ideas are appeals to white supremacist norms. So, for example, this idea of black excellence, and it sounds kind of innocuous. So, for example, black people should strive to be excellent, you know. But what's interesting to me is that for example, specifically in a US context, that is very much linked to this idea of respectability, right? So this idea that in order to be worthy of XYZ, you have to be excellent. So, this idea of excellence is actually really an appeal to white supremacist norms in my POV. So, that's a very problematic way, I think, of advocating for anti racism and advocating for the humanity of black people. I think for me, as a brown South African, this idea that we need to be excellent before we can be considered worthy of anything is really, really weird, because it places a bar on us that is not really applicable to other people. Others are humanized, whereas we don't have that option of just being human. We have to be excellent. The same thing with this concept of black girl magic, and that's another meme that is, that's had a traction over the last couple of years. Black girl magic can also be kind of skewed towards classism. It can be skewed towards this idea of, and it does have this positive connotation of black girls are inherently magical. But then once again, is this a dehumanizing POV? Why do black girls need to be inherently magical to be worthy of anything? Um, so I think what's problematic for me is that in the US context and in the South African context, we still lean into racial essentialism, and we still use white supremacist frameworks to construct our ideas of blackness. And that's what's deeply problematic for me. I think coming from a decolonial perspective as well, how do we decolonize concepts around blackness? What the hell is blackness? What does it exist in relation to? Even the term blackness, as if there's some kind of essence of black, is a bit problematic, um, because it creates this false idea, and it's so easy to reify into this notion of essence, right? So in black people, there is this essence called blackness, that excludes other kind of isness, whatever the fuck. So as a brown South African, I think the discourse of race in South Africa is stuck. It's it's kind of ground to a halt in the sense that it really hasn't evolved beyond accepting white supremacist notions of the inherentness of race. So, for example, we haven't problematized that. We haven't problematized the discourse of how can we speak of colored people as a distinct race, which is weird. Where did that category come from? And why do we give it currency? Why do we speak of black people in that racialized way, in that monolithic way, right? So it raises a lot of nuance of experience, language, of culture, when we create when we perpetuate these groups, because we didn't create these categories. White people created these categories. So when we talk about race, yes, we are in a double bind, because we understand that race is a social construct, and yes, even though something is a social construct, that doesn't mean it doesn't have real effects for black and brown people, especially black women, who get the brunt of all of those layers of intersections of oppression. So the for us to talk about race constructively is going to be difficult anyway as black and brown folks in SA, because by using the discourse of race, by not carefully using that discourse of race, we can end up reinforcing notions of racial essentialism that really just perpetuates white supremacist norms. So we need to be really, really careful there, I think, and we need to push the discourse forward. So how do we talk about colored as a category in South Africa in 2021? How the fuck do we talk about it? I've seen people attempt to talk about coloredness by falling back onto white supremacist norms of indigeneity and bloodlines. So this idea of, because we have an indigenous bloodline that links us to quote unquote Khoi people, that renders us valid as Africans, and that roots us into the land. But that's what's interesting there, is that, you know, we're not unpacking these categories, because essentially what we're doing is we're using the white supremacist framework of different races and white ideas of belonging, i.e. there's a genetic link that we can lay claim to, and that laying claim to that genetic link gives us the ability to lay claim to belonging, which I think is problematic. And it also renders colored people who do not access or who do not lay claim to those identities, it renders many of us as these weird drifting outsiders who don't, quote unquote, have a culture, or who are not, quote unquote, rooted. So this idea of rootlessness, this idea of culturelessness, is something that colored people also perpetuate when they push the trope of Khoisan identity, right? So colored people we are racially mixed and mixed and mixed. We are Creole. We are a Creole people. And that doesn't make us any less valid. Whether we access the discourse of Khoi rootedness or not, we are still as valid as, quote unquote, colored people, as Creole people, as people of mixed race and heritage, right? Language groups, etc. We traverse all of that as colored people. We run the gamut, right? We own fucking Afrikaans. We own English. We create language. We perpetuate language. We do it all. We hold up the sky, right? It's what we do. We don't need to appeal to crazy shit to be valid, because we're valid from the jump. So I think the sooner we bring in nuance to the discourse around race in South Africa, so first of all, understanding that race is a social construct, but that doesn't mean that we should be acting as if racial discourse isn't real and that it isn't embedded in culture and law, right? Because those assumptions around racial essentialism are baked into the culture, right? Anti-blackness is internalized by everyone. Colored people have internalized anti-blackness. We perpetuate anti-blackness. We weaponize it amongst ourselves, and we weaponize it against the black population. We internalize it by our standards of beauty. straight hair, light skin, light eyes, Irish ancestry. There's always that colored person that won't shut the fuck up about their Irish ancestry. Then we have colored people who have very strong Malay phenotypes and who've maintained the religious and cultural traditions from Southeast Asia. And there still people be perpetuating anti-blackness, even from that quarter. So, the constant striving for straight hair, proximity to whiteness in various ways, whether through language or dress or behavior or ideology, all of those appeals to proximity to whiteness are a lot of the things that we're going to need to unpack. We're going to need to start taking responsibility for that, because that's how our freedom begins. The problem here is that the issue for us is material, i.e. access to land and resources in South Africa, but it's also epistemological, right? It has to do with ontologies as well. It has to do with our epistemology. How do we know what we know and what is valid knowledge? Because we've been told that the knowledge that we build, and we've been taught that the knowledge that we build, the knowledge we make, is not valid knowledge, right? So institutions like higher education institutions, schools, clinics, churches, mosques, etc., are all perpetuating white supremacist norms. How do we unpack these ideologies? We need to learn to identify that. It's all part of our decolonial journey. It's all part of our liberation journey in South Africa. In Africa, we've got the opportunity, and even in the US, with Black Americans, with indigenous Americans, Native American people, we have an opportunity now to begin to really push for decoloniality, to really push for decolonizing what it means to be a person, to break down these categories of race in ways that benefit us. Because right now, white people would have us break down categories of race that benefit them. So essentially, they can exist in a position where they can ignore race and appeal to us to ignore race, while the racial injustice can perpetuate. And that robs us of language to describe the situation that we are in, to describe the positions that we are in. So language is important. We need to develop new language. We need to develop new ways of talking about race, new ways to develop, to describe and put that lens over our oppressions, because that's what's going to get us to a different place. Because right now, South Africans, in terms of race discourse, we're stuck. We're fighting over bread and butter issues, which are really real, which are crazy and hectic. But those bread and butter issues are connected to the very notions of what makes a black person, a colored person, a white person, notions of whiteness, notions of coloredness, blackness. Our material reality is the fact that we are landless, the fact that black people don't have access to resources in this country. Our very material reality is linked to our epistemological situation, which is our lack, our not having access to our own experience. So as colonized people, the basis of our coloniality is the fact that we do not have access to our own experience. Our experience is mediated through whiteness. It's mediated through white supremacy. So what does our experience look like without that lens? Who gets to say what counts as knowledge? Who gets to say what doesn't? And that's what we need to get back. Access to our experience. And things will begin to flow from there. So I think let's relook from the ground up. Black excellence is not enough. Black Lives Matter is not enough. There's room for that racial essentialism as a tool for political goals, but it's very limited. We need to get nuanced. We need to get a bit smarter, beyond the soundbite, beyond the meme. The pull and the pressure is about getting a little bit smarter to dismantle all the shit. Well, that's me. I'll chat to you guys again. I'll chat to you guys again when I feel I need to get something off my chest. Thanks so much for listening. If you have anything else you want to share, chat to me in the comments. Share this content. Have it out with friends and fam. Just chat about it. Thank you. Cheers.